Hi. Hello? Hi. Hi. So, welcome to our sixth live stream here. And as we have about 21 questions this time. My patrons gave me a list of excellent questions. I'm going to be splitting them between the 1 minute and the 40-minute mark. So I'm going to go through my first dib questions my patrons gave me, and then I'm going to go through the questions that you are currently commenting now. And so if I don't get to your question immediately, don't worry. My moderators are writing them down and sending them to me. And please don't spam. And rules are the same as what they were before. Questions on anything, basically. History, geopolitics, personal taste, literature. I will answer very strange questions and try to limit it away from what-if questions. I've seen these comment sections here where it often devolves into just do my alternate history scenario. That can get very boring. Everyone has their own scenario. So with that, let's get started. This is the last video where you're going to see COVID hair, by the way. I have a haircut scheduled for Thursday, so you're not going to be seeing this anymore. Okay, the first question is, who is the most influential person in history? And there's a lot of different ways to view this. One way is by which the person where most of the modern world is contingent upon their existence. So I initially considered Moses because all the Abrahamic religions are based upon Moses. However, Moses' life himself did not create Islam and Christianity. So I would go with Jesus as the most important person ever because Moses did not create the Abrahamic religions. He was just the first of those people. And I think Jesus, by creating Christianity, which is a third of the world's population, as well as being foundational for how Western society is structured and being the basis for much of Islam, would make Jesus the most important figure ever. You've won the ultimate lottery and are now the richest man in the world. What do you do now? So I think the richest man now is Jeff Bezos, who's got about 70 billion. I would not want to, I honestly wouldn't want to be the richest man in the world. I'd like to be moderately rich. But I think once you go past a certain level of income, it's more trouble than it's worth. And you have to hire security guards. You have to worry about being kidnapped. And so, I mean, if I was the richest man in the world, I would try to use it for the betterment of the world and to help people. I'd probably do a lot of malaria investment in Africa because malaria is something that, with a small amount of money, is pretty easy to solve. You get malaria nets. You get various. I don't know if DDT still works, but you can easily. It's very easy to get rid of malaria. That could save millions of lives. I would create an endowment to help people from poorer families get into top universities and help with education. I don't know. And then I'd do a lot of sensual pleasure stuff. I'd donate a lot to charity, that sort of thing. Had the USSR never existed, would there be more communists in the world today? Would communism be more mainstream and popular ideology instead of a fringe ideology it has become? Did communism have to be tried and fail miserably to die off? I know that there are still some communist individuals and communist political parties in the West, but you won't find a lot of mainstream and elected politicians or people at all who call for the means of production to be collectivized and who argue about the free market in its entirety. This is an interesting question, since Marxism as a respected ideology in the West died off because it died off a lot in the 40s when Stalin and Hitler allied. And a lot of the communist parties of the 30s were basically in Stalin's lap and they worshipped the Soviet Union. And so that the Stalin backstabbing the greater communist cause to help them work with the Nazis weakens the communist movement in the West a lot. But in general, I don't think communism would be more popular. Firstly, because I don't think wealthy capitalist countries can become communist or normally would under their own free will. That's because the middle class has very little investment inside communism, because the communism plays very well to intellectuals and, as Hayek called them, the elite of the proletariat. People like union leaders, people who are well off inside the union system, as well as intellectuals. And once you have a large middle class, as well as who have the petty bourgeoisie, as they're called by leftist theory, then once they're large enough, you're not going to get a large percentage of the population go communist. Communism only works in situations by which the large percentages of the population are disenfranchised, because if you have a stake in society, the chances of going communist are lower, because a communist system would take away your property. And I've actually heard something interesting. The US government has pushed a lot for home ownership, because they thought that if they gave people homes, they'd be less likely to turn communist because they'd have more of a stake in society. And so that's why communism has only willingly arisen independently in serf-based agricultural societies, where there's an enormous gap of wealth between the super wealthy landowners who do control the means of production and the landless peasantry. So that's why countries like Russia, China, Cuba have gone communist, but you've never seen a developed capitalist society, which is surprising because Marx said the exact opposite. Marx thought that communism would be an outgrowth of capitalism rather than a reaction to a feudal society moving into the modern world. Do you think that there could have been more than one world language? I mean, it's hypothetically possible. I mean, you would have to have some situation where people of the same social class are learning multiple languages. So it would have to be in a situation like where Britain and France remain the dominant world powers, and the British and the French elite both know each other's languages. And so the languages are somewhat interchangeable. Or in a world where some empire like the Romans had become massive, where the elite needs to know Roman and Greek, because in a situation like the Cold War, you have English, which would be closer to the world language, but in the second world communist nations, Russian was the lingua franca. And so that would not be two world languages. That would be two languages with large parts of the world. You're in charge of writing the next amendment of the American Constitution. Whatever you put into it will be official. What will it include? I would create the right to privacy, because the founding fathers had no idea of the technology that we can have now. And so we're in a situation in which personal privacy can just get thrown out of the window to the NSA and technology. I mean, Amazon Echo shocks me, because Amazon Echo is effectively the telescreen from 1984, where it can just listen to everything you say and send it back to Jeff Bezos and thus the US government. And so I would create a right to privacy by which the state can only read communications and between people and stuff and technology with a warrant. And so if the federal government wants to read someone's emails, they have to go to a judge to get a warrant for it. I think that would be definitely something. I would try to create a check and a balance against the bureaucracy. I'm not sure how I would do that, because in general, I don't trust any governmental force that doesn't have a check or a balance. So the part of the reason the US government's worked so well is the checks and balances between the executive, the legislative, and the Supreme Court. And so, but the thing is, the bureaucracy has been able to grow out and has been able to gain immense underhand power by not really having a check and balance, because there was no bureaucracy or desire for your bureaucracy in the 18th century, because there was no welfare state, because people's standards for what government needed to do were much lower. And so I would definitely do that. And so the bureaucracy growing has allowed the executive to gain more power because the executive controls the bureaucracy. And, oh, sorry, for non Americans, the executive means the president. So the president controls the bureaucracy. And so that's why presidents have such ridiculous power now, because they can direct the bureaucracy, which is an enormous amount of power in every field, to do what they want. And so I would do something. This appeared in the British show Yes Minister, which is a show from the pre-Thatcherite era. It's a comedy about a British minister who runs the Ministry for Minister of Affairs and has two bureaucrats who try to stop him from doing anything. And it's funny where they try to develop all these harebrained schemes to keep the politician from actually accomplishing anything. And one of the things he wanted to do, which I think would be a very smart idea, which would be making for every bureaucratic project, there has to be a cost and there has to be a length of time for to be accomplished. And if it doesn't get accomplished within that time, the bureaucrats involved suffer some indemnity or they get demoted. And so that keeps the bureaucracy from just ballooning and spending immense amounts of money and wasting people's time. Good to know there's at least one Yes Minister fan in that comment section. What do you think of people destroying Churchill statues? So there's a lot to unpack there. Firstly, like all men, Churchill was not perfect. He said racist things. He did things that were not great. But if we have to judge all men, if this is the range of if good's here, evil's here, Churchill's out here. I mean, Churchill saved the free world. He pioneered the tank, which broke the Western Front. He he did a lot of amazing stuff, and whole of human civilization is a massive debt to him. And it's weird. There's this whole community of people in our day today who basically try to tear down great figures. And I know there's going to be Indians who say he did the Bengal famine, and that is and the Bengal famine could have been handled better. For those of you who don't know, it was after the Japanese seizure of Burma. He cut off grain. And Burma was the rice bowl of that area, and so the rice stopped flowing to Bengal, and so the Bengalis started to starve, and millions of Bengalis died in that famine. And Churchill really didn't do a lot to save them. But on the other hand, I mean, that's not great. But on the other hand, there wasn't a lot of transportation opportunities inside that area. And back to an earlier point that I didn't really touch that well was I think there's a class of people today who are trying to tear down great figures. And so like so-called anti-racists, I've seen them try to tear down Lincoln statues or statues of or describe MLK as an Uncle Tom. For those who don't know, like Uncle Tom's a black person who's in cahoots with white people. And a part of it, I think, just comes out of insecurity where even if you deal with like, even if your immense focus is race, our generation has done very little compared to previous generations. Like, I mean, what accomplishments could we do that would relate to the heroism that was done in MLK's generation, or having hundreds of thousands of people die in the Civil War to end slavery? And I mean, just in a lot of ways, at least as an American, the current generation cannot match up the previous ones. My grandparents won World War II. Their parents won World War I. Their parents settled the West, going all the way back. And our generation has nothing that can really compare to that. And so it's easy for us to tear down figures in the past so that we don't have to deal with how they've done things that we haven't. And it's a form of insecurity. Okay. How long do you believe it will be before the first independent nation in outer space is established? So that depends on the trajectory we're going to use for colonizing outer space. And I would honestly think that we would have colonized space by now, because the cost benefits analysis is that the colonization of space, all things considered, is not that expensive. It would be in the range of probably less than 10 billion to get a profitable asteroid mining. And once you can do asteroid mining, you can make enormous amounts of money. And the colonization of space, once you get extra resources, allows you to basically grow continuously. And so I would have thought we would have colonized space by now, and it depends on our current trajectory. And so if we start colonizing space on Elon Musk's trajectory within the next couple of decades, then I guess it would be they'd become self-governing pretty quickly, probably by 2100. And but I don't know when we're going to start colonizing space. The first independent nation would probably be, judging from European colonization of different continents, within several hundred years. But I'm not sure. Most overrated events in history. The Vietnam War is super overrated, I think. Like, growing up, people would talk a lot about the Vietnam War like it was the most important war in history. But but the Vietnam War really was not that historically influential. I mean, it's not even that important in Vietnam today. And Vietnam is an American ally now, and there isn't a huge amount of bad blood. It's mostly American boomers who remember it from their childhood. And so I would go with the Vietnam War has been super overblown. If life was a video game, which of the following attributes would be the most important to put your points into? Strength, speech, stewardship, dexterity, creativity. There's a meme among my friend group that I'm really good at 3 things and I'm absolute shit at the rest. So I would go with, I think creativity is the most important. I think creativity lets you it lets you open up new mental doors, and we live in the current digital information environment. I think creativity is the most useful because you can make stuff, and if you can team up with someone who's super hardworking, then you can basically you two of you can work as a pair, and then you can accomplish great things. Again, strength, not super important in industrial economy. Oh, speech is super important. Yeah, speech might be more important than creativity, because people who are very charismatic but lack other categories can go very far in certain careers. Again, dexterity, not super important in industrial economy. I don't know what stewardship fully entails. Okay. So now on to the new questions. Oh, wow, I did 20 minutes on that. I got a question for you. Since the Holy Roman from your Holy Roman Empire remained united video, since the Holy Roman Empire remained united and centralized in the video, how would they be able to handle the Napoleonic Wars and World War I? Again, this is something I try not to push too far into the future with these timelines, because the butterfly effect basically means you can't predict past a certain range. And so there probably wouldn't be the Napoleonic Wars or World War I. That'd be something pretty similar to either one. But I don't know what that is, and so much would be different that I can't predict that. What do you think of the conversion of Hagia Sophia and the Islamification of Turkey? The Islamification of Turkey seems like a reasonable long-term thing. They got spurned by the European Union, and so it would make sense that they would try to become leaders of the Arab world. And once Turkey gets more and more powerful, it would make sense that they would try to dominate their local sphere. And so to dominate the weaker countries around them, or the Arab world, they would have to lean upon their Islamic identity. And as they become more powerful and secure, it would make sense that they would try to become more of an Islamic nation, because they would be more secure in their own civilization and fall back on their Islamic roots. For Hagia Sophia, I really don't know a lot. I honestly forgot that it wasn't a mosque in the first place. The art in Hagia Sophia is gorgeous, and so it would be a shame if they try to cover it up with various images. And I mean, Hagia Sophia is the most beautiful thing I've seen in my life, if I'm being honest. And so it would be a shame to cover up the Byzantine artwork. But I mean, they already did it in the 15th century, and so if it was done in the 15th century and they don't damage the art, then I don't see then a future regime could basically change it back. And politically, I don't see the point. If it were to become a mosque and they don't change any of the art, if they don't change any of the interior design, then I think it's perfectly fine. I mean, if the building is well maintained, I don't see a problem. What if China didn't exist? What alternative would you suggest? I mean, the Han Chinese have basically always been there. I mean, there's due to China's climate, there's going to be developed society in that area because it's right in the temperate zone on very fertile soil. So there's nothing really that can replace China. I mean, you could be referring to a divided China with a series of like independent states, but that would still be China culturally. What do you think of the Nile Dam and a possible water war? I find the Nile Dam exceptionally worrying because so Egypt is entirely dependent on the Nile, the Sudan to a lesser extent, and Egypt's almost their entire water supply comes from the Nile. And there's 100 million Egyptians who are living in one of the most densely populated areas on the planet. And so that means that that if the water supply is in any way damaged, there's going to be a humanitarian crisis in the area. And so, I mean, even if 2% of Egypt's 100 million population has to leave due to an issue, that would be one of the greatest refugee and humanitarian crises ever. And so, and the Egyptians don't have the ability to beat the Ethiopians on this. Sudan is Ethiopia's ally because the Sudanese are sitting on top of reservoir, and in large part of Sudan has a temperate climate could be a grain belt. So Sudan is much less water dependent than the other countries in that area, and so I'm hoping that the two of them can reach some sort of deal or conclusion by which like I heard that the Egyptians are planning on offering Ethiopia electrical supplies, and I'm hoping that works. But if it doesn't, then the two countries are basically are going to have a war. And that would be so horrifying because the war would basically result in Egypt no longer being able to function as a country. What if Deng Xiaoping's reforms never happened? So, Deng Xiaoping's reforms and the rising wealth inside China has allowed the Communist Party in China to last for much longer because the Communist Party's made an implicit deal with the Chinese people by which in exchange for making China a wealthier and wealthier nation, the Chinese people are going to put up with the CCP's inhumanity, their brutality, their corruption, their tyranny. And that's why I don't think the CCP is going to last with another 20 years, because once China hits like a certain ideological, once China hits an economic hard time or true hardship, as all countries do eventually, the CCP won't be able to maintain their legitimacy because their legitimacy isn't based upon elections. It's based upon the material rewards they give to their citizens. So if the CCP was unable to make China wealthier, then China would have collapsed like the other countries behind the Iron Curtain. And then China would probably be a democratic capitalist country, and then they would have reformed. Which famous ruler do you expect to have had the lowest IQ? So, I don't know. This one will take a bit of time to think about, but I would go with there was the king of Spain. I forget his exact name. In the late 17th century, before the War of Spanish Succession, he was an absolute idiot. So he did this whole thing of like I forget the exact stuff. He was his family was so inbred that he basically could not function as a human being. He would randomly ejaculate. Firing big guns was his only hobby. He could barely chew. Um, Charles the Hext, that's it. I'm going to go with him. I heard also Catherine the Great's husband wasn't that bright, but I don't think he would have been the lowest IQ. What do you think of the increase of U.S. presidential power over the time? A part of it is justified, I would say, from nuclear war, where if the Russians or the Chinese were to launch a nuclear strike, the president would have to make a decision within 5 minutes because then there's no way to consult Congress. But I really dislike the growth of presidential power because it makes America less democratic. For example, the U.S. can get embroiled in foreign wars that the American people have little interest in. The U.S. Congress has not declared a war since World War II. I mean, Korean War, Vietnam War, Iraq War, the wars after 9/11, none of those were declared. They were all just a police action declared by the president. And at the same time, the president's executive orders are immensely powerful. Like Trump or Obama, they've had almost nothing passed through Congress. They've done almost their entire presidencies have been done through executive order. It's sort of like 17th century England, where the king ruled for decades without consulting the parliament for taxes. And I don't think that's a healthy way for a society to function, because Congress is a better representation of the people's desire. And with Congress, you need to have discussion and to accomplish anything between the different classes and social groups inside America, between the different groups that are being represented. And that's not happening when the president is unanimously making decisions. Is racism an overblown issue? I would say in general, no, racism does exist. I mean, just running this show, I find there's immense amount of racism, I'd say. And I mean, my black friends tell me that they tell me that they've experienced racism, and I trust them on that. But I mean, I would say that racism does exist, but we shouldn't structure our entire society around solving it. And do you think libertarian free market ideas built the West, and why did the West abandon free market principles? I mean, the West existed before the free market. The West has existed since the 5th or 6th centuries after the fall of Rome. And so the West existed before capitalism, but the current West, it has capitalism very thoroughly integrated into its system. And so I would say that the West as a amorphous idea does not need a capitalism as driving force, but the West as it exists now does. Yeah. Would Taiwan's allies defend them if the Chinese declared war on them, or back out due to China's economic hold on the world? So China has got very strong allies, but there's a lot of countries that are in the American sphere of influence. In a lot of ways, it's similar to World War One, and so the American allies would back the United States in that struggle. The Chinese would back China. But as a total of the world economy, China's allies are much weaker. China's allies control Central Asia, basically the heart of Asia, parts of Africa, etc. But the U.S. has got the major world economies. So Western Europe, Japan, Australia, they would back the U.S., while China's allies would back China. What religion are you? This always comes up. I am a non-denominational Protestant Stoic. Sorry, a non-denominational Protestant Quaker Stoic. So I was raised a Quaker, but then I kind of left the church around age 14 then I took a lot of opinions from other denominations of Protestantism, but I still hold a lot of the Quaker viewpoints, and I am also a huge fan of Stoic philosophy, which I which is I'd say my dominant philosophy. Hmm. Hmm. Do you think Belgium will split up anytime soon? I don't know. It would depend on how much struggle there would be inside Belgian society, inside the European Union, and how much if there'd be an era of mass division and hatred inside Europe that would result in splitting apart. But the current stability of Europe suggests no, I would say, unless there's some massive crisis like a major war or a massive economic recession, that sort of thing. Again, I don't know a huge amount about Belgium, so what will the geopolitical implication of the COVID-19 pandemic be in the long run? That's really hard to say. I mean, I've heard that China will turn this into a massive success, um, but I don't know. Um, but I don't know if that's true. We haven't seen the pandemic to its final end. The Chinese Shanghai Stock Exchange is having a bull market, but I don't know. It seems like that's probably going to have a correction, possibly a recession. I don't see China being able to buy out entire countries like Tanzania, Kenya, because they're just because I don't see America controls the oceans, and I don't see America allowing the Chinese to project their militaries to seize countries outside of Africa or Central Asia. And if China does overt imperialism to secure its investments outside of China, that the world system would ally against China and would realize that China was a world threat. So if China were to exact enormous demands upon Kazakhstan to pay back its investments in Kazakhstan, Western Europe and the Europeans and a large part of the world economy would side wholeheartedly with the Americans and realize China was a threat. Um, do you think Twitter is toxic? I mean, I don't really deal with Twitter much. My Twitter account is basically just I just say things and I try to deal with the rest of actual Twitter very little. So I wouldn't be able to say if Twitter is toxic. I've heard Tumblr is very toxic. However, I don't I don't do much social media, if I'm being honest. I have an Instagram, have a Facebook, but I don't do much social media. What if the US joined the Central Powers? That's always something that comes up. And I don't know why it's such a popular timeline. I mean, the US had no self interest to do so. It was a majority British nation, and they would not want to declare war on the UK. And I mean, why would the US want to conquer Canada, which would be the only benefit it could ascertain from the conquest from joining the Central Powers? Um, y'all are asking a lot of what if questions. Could you see climate change forcing the West to go authoritarian? I don't think so. I mean, climate change helps the West a lot more. So, climate change is going to help a lot of areas quite a bit, and climate change is going to hurt a lot of areas. The areas that are going to be most hurt by climate change are deserts and warm climates that are going to dry up. So, areas like Egypt, Central Asia, basically the Muslim world, if we're being real, and parts of Australia, India as well. The big crisis we're going to see from climate change is the Himalayas. So the waters that support Southeast Asia, India, China, half of humanity are based out of the Himalayan glaciers. And so the Himalayas' ability to support glaciers basically creates an annual flooding that year. And if the Himalayas didn't have glaciers, that would mean it would just become immediate runoff. And so that would not help the region and not be able to create a stable source of water. And so that Asia is going to struggle the most from climate change. And so that's why we're seeing close to water wars in areas like Central Asia, the Himalayas, and Egypt. And so, but the thing is, so North America is going to do pretty well due to climate change. So a lot of areas in America are going to get wetter. So East America, east of the Mississippi is going to get wetter. Canada is going to become much more fertile. And so you would see North America doing, oh, sorry, you were talking about Western Europe. You would see North America get a lot wetter. Western Europe, meanwhile, so the big issue is a lot of countries just go underwater. Denmark, the Netherlands. So you would see more of a federated Europe and more of a united Europe because these smaller European countries would have to get the allyship of basically Germany to help them. And so the Germans could basically let them drown or help them out. And I mean, what would actually happen is these countries are very wealthy. They'd be able to develop an advanced dike system to keep back the ocean. So I've heard this interesting plan to basically dam up the North Sea and the English Channel and the Baltic, and to keep Denmark, Netherlands, that area from flooding. And so if it was dangerously close to that, they would probably do that rather than having Amsterdam, Copenhagen, London, Rouen, Ypres, whatever, go underwater. How do you expect Europe to change over the next 25 years? And so, okay, there's a couple different ways. The first is that the current Europe is in no way sustainable. The current Europe is the creation of the American empire, by which these European states demand America to pay for their military and do all of their geopolitics in exchange so that they can have expensive welfare regimes. And so current Europe can't survive without American political dominance, and the modern European Union basically needs America to do its foreign policy to survive. So every foreign policy crisis Europe has had has been solved by America. So the crisis in Yugoslavia, solved by America. Crisis in Libya, dealt with by Americans. Crisis with Russia, dealt with by Americans. Crisis with the Turks, dealt with by Americans. So current Europe cannot survive without American dominance. And so it depends on if the US imperium survives. And I think the US imperium will survive in Europe longer than almost anywhere else on Earth. But the current Europeans are going to have to realize that the current alliance, I think current Europe will have to realize that they need to step up their game in their foreign policy and their military. And so that's going to continue. And so the current European attitude that wars, foreign policy, basically playing the game of empire is inherently morally evil, they'll have to realize that makes no sense. And also immigration is going to be a big issue by which climate change will probably cause, and birth rates are probably going to cause a humanitarian crisis in the Middle East and parts of Africa. As those areas dry up, and Africa has a nowhere near sustainable, I was talking about Egypt earlier, that's a perfect example of that. So Africa has a nowhere near sustainable population growth, by which Lagos in Nigeria is predicted to have a population of 88 million, bigger than Germany by the end of the century, by 2050 or the end of the century. And if that continues, there's no way Africa can support that population with its current agriculture. And so Europe will basically they'll have to make a hard stance on immigration fairly soon because the populations of the areas around them are getting so large. Do you think that's an interesting question? Yeah, but I didn't really answer the race question very well. So I feel like if you say racism doesn't exist, then that's overblown. Racism does exist. It is fairly bad. But there is a group of people who they take it to very dramatic and over the top like solutions. And I think that if you can take it to a radical side, then that's overblown. However, a more moderate position that racism exists and is pretty bad is accurate. So I'm gonna go back to that. But I saw an interesting question there about will China get immigration like the U.S. And I would say no. So I would. So the thing is, China's already got a massive population, and they don't really need more people. And so, I mean, that's just the biggest thing. China doesn't need more people, and China is also viciously racist as of now. I mean, like the Chinese. I mean, there's African immigrants in Guangzhou. China does not like them. And the African immigrants are looked down upon, and there aren't a lot of opportunities, and you're not going to find people more hardworking than the Chinese. I mean, where would you import people from that are willing to work more hours and are more competent than the Chinese? So I don't think China is going to get a lot of immigration in the near future. Should the USA and Europe be considered the same civilization? I mean, of course. I mean, under what metric could the USA and Europe not? I mean, speaking the same language, same religion, same literature, same broad culture. I mean, the US and Europe share so much. I mean, it would be ridiculous to say otherwise. Do you get demonetized a lot? Actually, less than you'd think. There was a point a couple of years ago when, so YouTube's run like a third world dictatorship, I'm going to be fair, where they'll have random purges that you can't predict and all that sort of thing. And so YouTube was going through a purge a couple years ago where a third of my videos have been demonetized, but they've basically realized that I'm not dangerous. I'm not a threat. And so very few of my videos get demonetized. In the last 6 months, the only two have been my one about COVID. What if SARS was as deadly as coronavirus? And my video about what if Hitler was never born. So 2 videos with in the last 6 months, which is perfectly acceptable for me. Yeah. How awful is Kpop? I don't listen to enough Kpop for me to really know. I mean, actually, I have a fair amount of respect for boy bands because they're able to be so good at channeling their teen girl fan base's desires and then marshaling armies of obsessed fans. So I respect boy bands for that. I don't listen to enough K-pop to know if it's really to know how bad it is, but from what I have heard, it's better than the mumble rap crap we have today. I mean, I would take K-pop over, like, I don't know, over Lil. I'm trying to think of what's the big one? Like Designer, then like Future. I take K-pop over Future any day. Do you think World War III would be with nukes? I don't. So China has a treaty by which China has a treaty. Sorry, someone has said a comment. Do you listen to the band? I do. The night they drove old Dixie down. So there's the. What was I talking about actually? Oh yeah, World War III with nukes. So I don't think it would be with nukes. China's got a World War III, if it were to break out, would be between the United States and China. China has a treaty by which if they will not launch nukes unless nukes are launched upon Chinese land. And I think that is a pretty good summary of what a world war today would be like. In that, firstly, nuclear THAAD, or the ability to, or the program that anti-missiles also isn't a THAAD like what's above a Chad or something like that. So so THAAD can basically knock half of nuclear missiles out, which means the nuclear deterrent is lessening over time. And so That's one factor, and the other is it's inside no one's self-interest to have a nuclear war. And so and the other thing you got to remember is we assume total war is the norm. However, for most of history, total war has not existed. There's been a period of there's been war has had limits that have been created. And so I think that if a world war were to break out, there'd be some sort of deal by which the US would agree not to attack China proper, the Chinese would agree not to attack America proper, but fighting would be allowed to be fought Vietnam, Korea, those areas, and the threat of nuclear war is what would prevent the war from escalating to attacking the actual nations involved. Okay. At the 50-minute mark, I'm going to go back to my patrons' questions. What do you think about Kaiserreich? I don't really follow it that much. I honestly don't follow alternate history that much. I've heard the fan base is somewhat toxic. It seems crazy that communism would have taken over Britain and France in the 1920s. The U.S. splits into civil war. There seems to be a lot of really dumb stuff in Kaiserreich, if I'm being honest. But I don't really know enough. I don't follow Kaiserreich at all. I don't play Hearts of Iron, so I don't see the point. Oh, good next question. Do you play any video games like Hearts of Iron or Europa Universalis 4? I honestly don't play a lot of Paradox. I'm not a Paradox fan. I've played a little bit of Crusader Kings, but I'm not a huge Paradox fan, no. I know every single one of you is a Paradox fan to a man, so I'm not going to badmouth Paradox, but it felt a little bit too much like homework for me. I like RTSs. I like Company of Heroes. I like StarCraft. My favorite video game of ever is Rise of Nations. I used to play a lot of Civilization, but this is going to sound kind of dumb. I played it, and this isn't true of all my strategy games. I've played strategy games so much that I can basically win them no matter what I do. And I don't want to play at the hardest difficulty because that just seems like I'm wasting my own time by making a game that's purposely too hard. And an issue I dislike with a lot of strategy games is that the AI cheats. So rather than actually making the AI smarter, they just make the AI stronger. So for Civilization 5, they give when you play Civilization 5 on really hard difficulties, they just make your happiness they just make it impossible to have an empire because the happiness system is so skewed against you. And at the same time, the enemies, they just make them cheat, give them 2 cities to start. So you're not fighting against a smarter enemy, you're just fighting against a more powerful enemy. So, and that's what I love about Company of Heroes. Company of Heroes actually has very smart AI. I think I'm playing Company of Heroes against a very smart chess player, which is why I really love Company of Heroes. Oh yeah, another thing I dislike about Paradox. Paradox has the potential, at least Hearts of Iron. I've never played Europa Universalis in my life, but Hearts of Iron, you have really weird stuff that could never happen historically. Like I've seen Italy take over all of Africa several times. Or you can take over Iceland by I feel like a lot of Hearts of Iron players, they look through certain cheat codes to basically do stuff that would never work historically, like seizing Iceland through some bizarre, like Germany seizing Iceland through some bizarre code that never actually existed. What is your opinion of Poland ball? I'm going to warn you, I don't follow memes much. So Poland ball, they're like the tiny balls that like countries, and then they say dumb things to each other. So there'll be a Poland ball, with a Polish flag, and then there'll be one of Germany, and it's memes about how countries interact. I don't follow memes. I'm going to warn you. Can you explain how slavery affects industrialization? So, So the two are connected, but I don't think that there has to be a relation. So as there is, industrialization strengthens slavery and vice versa. So the rise of industrialization in the UK and the need for cotton is what resulted in the creation of the Cotton Belt and the survival of slavery in the American South. But the two don't have to exist together, because after industrialization ended up killing slavery, and that the North became powerful enough and wealthy enough that it crushed the South due to industry. And the North and Britain were able to keep growing industrially without slavery since by changing cotton production to India and Egypt, where slavery didn't exist. So that's that. And I made a chart in my Atlantic slavery video about comparing current GDP, and current GDP is for the most part based upon how much your country industrialized versus participation in the Atlantic slave trade. There just was no correlation. And the correlation was actually the countries that did the most of the slave trade, aka like Portugal and Spain. They were the poorer countries because they didn't industrialize as much. So, yeah. Is a multipolar world better than the US-led unipolarity? I would honestly, I'm an American, so I'm biased here. I would say the American unipolar world is better because the Americans are going to protect everyone's world trade. And so in American unipolarity, or America being the bipolarity and unipolarity, for if you're including the time of the Cold War, resulted in a golden age of personal freedom, technological advancement, and the greatest growth of wealth in all of history, because the U.S. protected foreign traffic. It protected small nations from getting conquered by larger ones. It protected the rights of companies to deal in foreign countries. It spread freedom throughout the world and supported democratic regimes. And in a multipolar world, then you'd have powers like I can't picture Turkey or Germany being great powers and doing anything except supporting their own self-interest. China as well. And the US is really, 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 really weird in that it's one of basically the only countries in world history that doesn't inherently just support its own self-interest when it does foreign policy. Okay, I'm going back to patron questions. You're the emperor of China and Genghis Khan just declared war on you. How do you defeat him? This is really hard since I know I'm not as smart as Genghis Khan. And so that basically means that it's hard for me to think up strategies that would let me defeat him, that he wouldn't have already have thought up a way for me, he wouldn't have already thought up my way that I would think of to defeat him and figure out how way to defeat that. And so the biggest issues Genghis Khan's enemies faced when they fought him was that he was just unbeatable on the battlefield. So the way Genghis Khan defeated empires much larger than him was he dragged them into areas where he had the geographic advantage and where he could use his massive mobility to defeat them. So what I would do is I would just fortify my empire, and I would move my armies behind cities. Then I would bog Genghis Khan down in a long siege campaign that would tire his armies out, and then I would catch them off guard in the night and slaughter them. Favorite animated film? I would say Princess Mononoke by Studio Ghibli. It's the only one of the few animes that I've watched, but I really, really, really love it. It's a very good movie. It talks about the struggle between nature and between nature and between between industrial progress. And so Princess Mononoke, well written, good characters, absolutely gorgeous. A favorite animated movie. Thoughts on the Belt and Road Initiative. So the Belt and Road is very interesting. There are multiple ways to view it. The first of which is that it's a sign of weakness on China's part, in that China is in the position the United States was in 1940, in that they're producing more goods than their population is able to consume. So China needs to expand its massive industrial abilities to its allies and the rest of the world. And so that's what they're doing. They're getting these poorer countries and trying to develop them. And by developing them, they're trying to make them captive markets to China. And at the same time, it's a diplomatic strategy by which the Chinese are trying to turn these countries into Chinese allies. They're doing something very tricky by which the Chinese they're giving countries enormous amounts of debt, and the countries are going to take this debt to become wealthier. And oftentimes they're tinfoil hat dictators. The West refuses to invest in them. And so the Chinese give these tinfoil hat dictators a lot of money, and then there's no way they can actually pay them back. And then the Chinese takes their stuff. So the Chinese have taken Sri Lanka's biggest port. The Chinese, and they're planning on confiscating Kenya's railroads. And so I think the Belt and Road could work in Central Asia, where the Chinese are close, but I don't think the Belt and Road will work in areas where China has to project naval power, because the Chinese are profoundly weak in naval power. So if the Chinese want to seize an area in like Africa, those countries are just going to steal the money, become American allies. China can't send a military force to East Africa to take their stuff. And another thing that makes the Belt and Road very interesting is I was talking to a Chinese friend a couple of years back where so I was thinking that China would have to expand into the ocean, because I was doing this from an Anglo-American perspective where the ocean is the dominant way you move and the dominant way you move large amounts of goods. And so I thought that China would have to build up an amazing navy, seize the Straits of Malacca, move past the first island chain of the Philippines, or the second island chain of the Philippines, Japan, move out into open water in the Pacific. He said something very interesting, that China is a land-based nation, not an ocean-based nation. And so China's idea instead, because they've always been a land-based rather than naval power, is to move into Central Asia. And I had never thought of that, because I assumed that the west of China was just impossible to move out of. And so that really struck me. And so Asia is a majority of mankind. And so if you can knit Asia together and develop it, you have the largest market in the world. And if you can basically turn the Western world, which is a peninsula and the islands of North America, basically, if you split that off, then you will be so powerful. I got a question. Are you an introvert or an extrovert? I am an introvert, but I often get confused for an extrovert. I need a lot of alone time to process and to think and all that stuff. But I'm a very social person. I like talking. I like meeting new people. So I often come across as an extrovert, but I actually am an introvert. Do you think an independent Republic of Texas could have survived into the 19th century? So no. The Republic of Texas was an intermediate phase between the colonization by American settlers and the United States having the political will to annex it. And basically all Americans at the time were willing to or wanted to seize Texas. And America only seized Texas once they realized how weak Mexico was, and they could just do it. And that would have happened at some point, and so Texas could not have survived. By the way, basically all Texans wanted to get annexed by the Americans. Do you plan on making a video about your fantasy worlds? I find them very intriguing. Thank you very much. I would like to make a video about them. The issue is I'm not sure what to do for visuals, because I'm not an artist. I'm not an animator. I can't draw stuff for all my fantasy worlds. But at the same time, and if you have solutions for this, please tell me. At the same time, I don't want to just turn them into a podcast. So I'd like to talk about my fantasy worlds. and I could only make a couple maps for the fantasy world, and so I don't want to have like a 20-minute video with only 4 images in it, and so yes, and yeah, okay, I'll probably make a fantasy video at some point. Is cereal a soup? I would say cereal is not a soup, since a soup demands a broth, and cereal is not a broth. I would put cereal under a category of oatmeal, and and so cereal is a modern derivation of oatmeal, and because oatmeal is you've got the oats and then you mix in milk or whatever you want to add to it. Actually, fun fact: cereal was invented in the late 19th century as a way to prevent masturbation because they thought that rich foods enhance the libido. So it was invented. Actually, Kellogg cereal was invented by a Seventh-day Adventist preacher. Are cats or dogs better? I prefer dogs. I like dogs because, so when my parents divorced, my father got cats, my mother got dogs. Oh, I have lived with both. Um, I prefer dogs since I'm not sure cats love me. It's like the cat just acts like a master all the time. The cats just demand food. They don't spend any time with you. Like our cats, they just spend all day outside hunting and they only come in for food. And and dogs, a dog's always happy to see you home. Would you look good in a handlebar mustache? I would not look good in a handlebar mustache. I do not think it would match my face. I don't think I look very good with a mustache in general. I prefer beards to mustaches. Um, Kiss, marry, kill. Hitler, Mussolini, Emperor Hirohito. Okay, firstly, I'd like to say I am not gay. Nothing wrong with being gay. I will kill Hitler, of course. No, this is just too weird. I can't do this. Sorry, I cannot do that. What are some of the worst and best flags in history? So the worst flag, I'd say, are the Abbasids in the Umayyads. So I would say that the Abbasids and the Umayyads, they had white and black with nothing else as their flag. And the Umayyads had, and the best flag in history, I would say, I really like medieval Wessex flag of a wyvern on with a red background. I like a lot of medieval flags that have cool animals on them. The Vikings had a pretty cool flag where the Raven banner, which was a banner shaped like a raven, like a triangular raven, which is pretty cool. Oh, wow. How do you think coronavirus will be remembered? It'll be remembered mostly for quarantine, which will be an emblematic part of the 2020 decade. Quarantine will be remembered like the Blitz has been remembered by British people for generations afterwards. I'm waiting for the teen romance movies made about quarantine and the love stories about quarantine, lovers struggling with their apart. It's going to be a lot of fun to watch quarantine TV shows come out too. Can Russia return to a great power under Putin? Putin is turning it into. Putin. Russia is the external appearance of a great power. They're very aggressive. They've got a powerful military, but they've got collapsing demographics, no economy. And so Putin has run Russia for 20 years, and that's the way he's led it. So that leads me to believe that with 20 more years, Putin will continue the direction he has led the nation into. What if the Chinese won it? No, I'm not doing what if questions. Is it more advertiser friendly to make recent history than old history? Definitely. So no one cares at the Hittite Empire. No one cares at Poland, Lithuania. No one cares at Romania. Things that make things very, very, very emotional is World War II. And basically, if you keep away from World War II, you're not going to get advertisers are not going to have a problem. But World War II is very emotional for lots of people. Thoughts on micronations. They're a bit strange. They're quirks in history. They don't really matter. I mean, I don't see why San Marino matters. I don't see why Andorra matters. And they don't matter. I don't see why they matter. How politically divided do you think America is compared to the past? I'd say America is at its most divided phase ever, par except the Civil War. I mean, the Civil War has got to be the number one, just because it resulted in a literal civil war. But now it's very much divided, especially in an ideological basis. The two political parties basically worship different religions, and they can't agree on a single thing. It's almost like a joke, like pick some completely benign topic and see if the political organizations will agree on it. Could there be a great migration from the Islamic world to Europe? There already is. Who will colonize Antarctica? No one. Antarctica is useless. Opinions on city-states. City-states are remarkably interesting in that, so I read an interesting book that suggested, so city-states form when no king in an early stage of development is able to exert power over a large region. And so the local villages basically grow and grow and grow until each village is a city, and then they can't unite. And city-states are capable of immense competition, immense creativity. That's what we saw in ancient Greece and we saw in Italy. City-states are also more democratic because everything is on a smaller. The book is War and Human Civilization by Azar Gott, best history book ever. And so on a smaller level of development, it's easier for democracy. City-states also have strong infantry armies because again, people are more invested in the local social system, so you can get people besides the aristocracy to fight hard. And city-states tend to be self-defeating because the more powerful a city-state becomes, the more likely it is to conquer surrounding city-states. And if it conquers the surrounding city-states, the city-state loses the advantages inherent inside the city-state and become just another country. What culture will aliens have when we have first contact? How would I know? There's no way in hell I would know what that would be. Thoughts on agreeing China. China's worker to retiree ratio will be 2.1, 2 to 1 by 2050. Yeah, that's going to be a big issue. So China currently has an export-driven economy, and it'll be an issue to see once their workforce is no longer competitive, then they're going to run into some really, really bad issues. One thing is the CCP is brutal, and so they could do policies to somehow lower the population of elders, although Confucian values makes that really, really, really hard because in Confucian society, the elders are those that deserve the most respect. But as has mentioned before, the CCP has no moral compass. And at the same time, the CCP might create a two or three child policy rather than a one child policy. And so there might be more and more pressure to have more children. But at the same time, the Chinese housing market is so screwed up with Chinese housing prices so high that it's hard to form a family, since there just isn't, it's hard to get multiple rooms for multiple children in an urban setting, because lots of Chinese people are trying to get into a couple cities, but the CCP controls the housing market, so the price of urban real estate is super high. How do you style your hair? I don't know. I'm waiting until my haircut on Thursday. Why do the houses cost so much? The CCP, so people don't actually own, land in China. They rent it for a long period of time from the CCP. And so the CCP they control the land. They set a pre-existing high land tax. And then at the same time, then they rent it to real estate people. The real estate people often have connections with the government, and so they set it even higher. And then the actual people are the ones who suffer. So what happens in Hong Kong, for example, is that most of the island of Hong Kong is wild, but the Chinese government, to get a higher property tax from multinationals, prevents the people from expanding and building outwards. And so foreign multinationals buy super expensive bases in Hong Kong. The CCP collects higher taxes from higher real estate, and then at the same time, so the Chinese government gets more revenue from that, and so the local Hong Kong people are the ones who suffer. And so housing conditions in Hong Kong are super, super, super expensive. Where does Islamophobia originate from? All phobias originate from our natural tribalistic tendencies. People naturally dislike people who are different from them because we have an incentive to support our tribe that goes back to our ancient biology. And so the thing is, something people don't often realize is that it's inside our self-interest to support our gene. We are designed to support our genes, not us. So I'm drinking tea. Our genes. So a reason you could go for toxic relationships a lot is that your genes are not looking for a relationship that make you happy. They're looking for a biological mate who could have a good immune system that supports your could have some blank trait that would work well for the child, but your genes have no incentive to make you happy. It's interesting. There's an interesting thing about, I read saying that, so the wise sage who discovered happiness and discovered the greatest wisdom, he probably only had 1 or 2 kids, or even more probably none at all. Well, some fuckboy who had 6 kids, his genes are the ones that passed on. So, and so our natural bias is to support people with genes similar to us, which is the origin of racism, xenophobia, all that stuff. And so that's an issue we face as the human race. What's the worst border war in history? I mean, it's got to be the Holy Roman Empire. I mean, I just refuse to make maps of the Holy Roman Empire from the 13th century onward, because it makes no sense. The Holy Roman Empire was the border. It's just a group of tiny states that has no rhythm or reason. I mean, in hundreds upon hundreds of them, and so that's that. What is your opinion on the current birth rate in the developed world? Will it continue to fall or go up? So people are in general, I really dislike it when intellectuals think the average person is dumb, because the average person may be dumb at intellectual stuff. People are very good at working inside their own self-interest. So people are in general very good at figuring out how many kids to have. And so I don't like the idea of people telling people to have by how many kids they should have. And whenever people try to control birth rates, it goes badly. So China's one-child policy is going to cripple the nation now. Whenever Eastern European countries that try to get people to have higher birth rates, they have super low ones now. These people started to resent it. And so can you please get rid of bros los trashos? And so so the populations tend to be self-reinforcing. And so the reason we've seen declining birth rates in the West is there are less opportunity for children. Like Europe has seen a decline from 38% of the world's economy in 1960 to 23% now. So, and Europe's economies have not grown a lot since the 70s. And so that's why we've seen declining European birth rates, because there's little reason to have children or to have a replaceable birth rate, because the opportunities are not replaceable. Or similarly, the United States, while it had a growing economy, had a growing birth rate. But the US's birth rate is now declining, or the US's birth rate is now stable or declining because opportunities have gone down. And so we're going to see stable or growing birth rates if we go to a society that has more economic growth for the average person. And at the same time, the current situation of housing is really not good for children. And that's an issue for a current society, in that the jobs are centered in a couple of tiny cities due to an information economy. And so that drives up the cost of real estate. And so, I mean, if we had a society in which it was easy to have a good paying job in a small town, you would see a higher birth rate, because in a small town, it's easy to buy a multi-room house where you can have multiple kids fairly cheaply and send them to a relatively good public school. Why do you have a beard? Actually, I know you're being a troll, but there's a fun story there. So one time, it was in the middle of the winter. I was walking down the street. There was the howling wind, and then so the wind blew my glasses off. And so for like a week or two, I didn't have any glasses before I could get a new pair. And I'm practically blind without these. And so without my glasses, I couldn't shave effectively. And since I couldn't shave effectively, I started to grow a beard, and I liked the beard, and so I kept it. Why is there this whole thing about my tea drinking habits? I am currently drinking Asian herbal orange tea. I prefer black tea, but I drink herbal tea past noon, because if I drink caffeine past noon, I can't fall asleep. How do you fix the housing crisis? The housing crisis is caused by an in the West, it's caused by an intelligence-based economy, by which most of the jobs are concentrated in the top elite, and the top elite reside in the same cities, so that they can maintain their social relationships between each other. So the social elite in the U.S. lives in cities like New York City, San Francisco, Boston, etc., so that they can relate between each other. And the rest of the bottom 85% of the country has just had a declining standard of living. And so you would have to see a broadening of the opportunities inside the country, and a move away from an intelligence-based economy and one based around a handful of wealthy cities. And the current societal economic system is having so many issues that I think we're going to move away from that, and we're going to move towards a different system. I'm actually reading a super interesting book called it's by George Friedman, who's the founder of Stratfor. It's which is the biggest geopolitics company in the world. It's called The Storm Before the Calm, and it says that America goes through 50 and 80-year political cycles, 50-year economic and social ones. And the 2020s are when the political cycle of the Roosevelt era, which was based upon rule by experts, basically, and the Reagan economic cycle, which was based upon investment and the accumulation of capital. The two are colliding and coming to an end. And so by the 2030s, we're going to see a new economic and social system, which is very interesting. Okay, 10 minutes left, guys. How terrible do you think a world government would be? It would be absolutely corrupt. I mean, look at every global organization is terrible. I mean, so FIFA, look at how corrupt FIFA is. look at how corrupt the African Union is. I mean, the UN gets a lot of prestige, but at the same time, UN UN peacekeeping forces that aren't selected from Western Europe commit the same levels of atrocities as most third world countries, and so a world government would just become the tyranny of small interests, and it would collapse down towards the baseline. The baseline would be so like Arab and African countries would be the countries that would get the most votes, and so they would control what human rights were. Um, so that's that. Do you think China will gain its old influence and replace America? I think China is going to be very powerful, and after a certain point, I think China's real potential can be unleashed once they lose the CCP. Um, and I think China and America will be there are a point where the two countries will be roughly the same power because the balance of power basically negates the balance of power as a way of balancing stuff out, where if one country is actually more powerful, then more allies will help out another country. Um, do you think the 2020 crisis is as bad as 1929? It's really hard to talk about this economic recession because our capital markets are really screwed up, and that the Chinese and the American stock markets have both been going up, but the actual economic health of the country has been really terrible. I mean, a quarter of the population's unemployed in America, but the relationship between capital and the actual economy has been divorced because governments keep on printing vast amounts of money to pay off their short-term gains. That is an immense issue, and so it's hard to know where our economy actually is because technically we're not in a recession, but in reality, when a quarter of your population is unemployed, you're in a terrible recession, and it's hard to know how society will reopen. This is a big issue with coronavirus, where it's unclear if the deaths that we would accrue from opening up early from coronavirus are equal to the social instability we'll have from keeping a quarter of our population unemployed for multiple years or for a year. And so we need to know when society is going to reopen and in what manner. And so and also, once we reopen society, we're living with a Keynesian view of the economy. And so I like parts of Keynesianism, but the current economic doctrine is just so Keynesian that Keynes would not approve of it. And we tried that for the 2008 financial crisis, and it did not work. It resulted in the economy on paper becoming better, but the actual quality of living not stagnating or getting worse to the average person, because Keynesian economics is based upon the influx of capital into the economy, and so that influx was able to help the accruing of capital. But our current society does not need the accruing of capital. Our current society needs more innovation, more technological progress, better living wages, and so we're currently trying to paint a door with a hammer. And so that's going to be an issue with our economy leaving this. Which century do you think is the richest in human history? That would be the 21st by any metric you look at. Who do you consider the best and worst U.S. presidents? Best would have to be George Washington. I have immense respect for George Washington. George Washington beat the British. He kept America a unified country. He crushed the various rebellions after the war. And most importantly, he stepped out of power when he easily could have maintained it, thus setting a democratic precedent. So George Washington cannot, and he was also known to be personally a man of incredible honor. Everyone of that era said, you will never meet a man better and more honorable than George Washington. And the worst, I mean, you gotta say Buchanan. Buchanan is everyone's choice. Just giving the South everything it wanted before the Civil War, turning the South into a spoiled child that when a Yankee won the presidency, or a Yankee who wasn't in the South's pocket, the South just seceded. Should people under 18 be allowed to vote? I would say no. I think I mean, throughout history, 18 has generally been the age in which you're considered an adult, and that makes sense from the purpose of your brain development. I mean, your brain isn't done developing until you're 25, and 18 seems to be a good number. And I mean, I can't see people who are economically dependent upon their parents voting independently because their parents will be like, vote for this party, or I'm not paying for you to do blank. Hmm. Which important battles do you think don't get enough attention? So I would say Poltava definitely doesn't get enough attention. For those of you that don't know, Poltava was a battle when Sweden was invading Russia and winning, and then Russia defeated them, thus setting Russia's stage for being a great world power. The Battle of Sacheon, when the Japanese were invading Korea in the 16th century, and they were trying to become the great East Asian power, and the Koreans on the Yisun Sea with like 6 ships defeated 300 Japanese. Again, a great battle that stopped the Japanese Empire in its tracks. Not really talked about much. Um, there was, I would say, the battle where Marius defeated the Germanic tribes around 100 BC, thus running the Germanic tribes from driving into Italy and destroying the Roman Empire. That's again very important. But there's so many that aren't coming to my mind now. How smart do you think your average viewer is? My average viewer is definitely smarter than the average by a large margin. Um, wow, a lot of questions. Thoughts on the longevity of the UN and EU. So the European Union will have no longevity once the American Empire is gone. Once the American Empire stops existing, the European Union has no way to survive because there's so much internal competition inside it. There's no way you can get the Germans, the British, and the French, the Poles, Italians, etc., to agree on a foreign policy. And so once America's gone, EU dies. United Nations. So the United Nations, once there's going to be a world war, the United Nations will have no influence because once there's a world war, the United Nations will have to either pick a side or lose all credibility. And the United Nations has been able to survive since there's been no major war. And so both the UN and the EU might survive in an office in Geneva somewhere or New York. But I don't think that their ability to maintain influence is going to last very long. Hmm. Okay, 2 more minutes, guys. Give me your best questions. Wow. What are your pet peeves in your daily life? That's hard. I generally try to not let the world bother me too much, but I really dislike unnecessary loud noise. Um, I dislike people randomly shouting, people randomly saying dumb things. I dislike hmm, I dislike people walking too slowly on the sidewalk. I dislike That's all that can jump to my mind, honestly. Do you think the CCP will fail? I think the CCP is going to fail in the next 10 years for the reasons I mentioned earlier in this video, by which they have an implicit social contract with the Chinese people that the wealthier the Chinese people get, the Chinese people are going to put up with all their crap. And so once China faces hardship, as all countries do, the CCP is going to collapse. And so I think that's most accurate. And the bottom 2/3 of China are not treated well. And so if they snap, the country's going to break. Okay, two more questions. How important is the Navy to becoming a great power? It so it dep In the current age, I would say very important. It used to be that the only thing that mattered was controlling your side, your continent. So for a republic, the Mongols, they controlled the whole most of the known world by controlling the land. But now that we have to deal with the whole world, and most of the world is water, becoming a naval power is very important. The main exception is if you want to control Eurasia, or where a majority of mankind inhabits. So if your strategy is to control Eurasia and then ignore the external areas like the New World, Africa, etc., you can pull that off without a navy. Okay, one last question. Okay, I'm going to go with the question of how does the balance of power work? Okay, the balance of power works. There's three different balances of power you can have. The first is a unipolar balance of power, by which there's one great power surrounded on all sides by barbarians. And so a unipolar world system, for example, would be not surrounded by barbarians, but the United States in 1990, where the U.S. controlled most of the world's economy and had no real rivals. And another would be the Roman Empire or China for most of its history. So the Chinese government controlled most of the civilized world, and they were attacked on all sides by barbarians. So a unipolar balance system is basically barbarians versus the one empire, or the empire falls apart, internal factions. A bipolar world system is one in which there's two great powers. And so basically in a bipolar world system, the two powers compete. An example of this would be like Persia and Rome, or the US and the Soviet Union. The two powers compete and they pay for various factions against the others. Then, once you get past a bipolar world system, you get a multipolar one. In a multipolar one, you've got many different powers. And so in a multipolar system, the greater the basically people prevent anyone from getting actually too much we prevent any faction from getting too much bigger, and if they do, the weaker factions team up against the more powerful one. And the examples of this are like most of European history, the warring states, China, etc. And so in multipolar systems, it's very difficult to win because everyone else teams up from you getting too powerful. So I'm going to answer the final question. What's your favorite TV show on Netflix? My favorite TV show, I would say, is The Twilight Zone. The Twilight Zone is my favorite TV show ever. For those of you who don't know what's about, it's like Black Mirror, sort of, from the 1950s, and each episode is a twist ending or it's a science fiction story. So one of my favorites is a girl's driving across the country, and she sees this hitchhiker at every intersection, going for thousands of miles, and it turns out the hitchhiker is deaf. And he's been following the whole way because she's been dead the whole time. Or another Twilight Zone plot is aliens show up and their whole motto is "We serve" or we're here to serve man, and their book on how to operate is called "To Serve Man," and then the last second they translate "To Serve Man" and it's a cookbook. And my second favorite TV show as of now is Au Service de la France, or A Very Secret Service. And it's a French comedy, black comedy about the decline of the French Empire around 1960. It's how these French Secret Service agents basically do all this dumb, corrupt stuff. And it's just a dark, dark comedy. And they kill off main characters for gags and jokes. It's so funny. I have a very black sense of humor, so that works. But I mean, so that's it. So thank you very much for watching this. I'll do this again in a month. It's been great doing this, and see you later.